Welcome to the Thinking Director channel, where thinking differently leads to living differently. Have you ever thought that a single word, debt, could trade away ports, airports, oil fields, and even the fate of a nation? Welcome to Success Mindset, a channel where we don't just talk about how to get rich or escape poverty, but dive into the untold stories behind the global economic curtain. A world where money isn't just a means, it's power. It's a weapon. And sometimes, it's a deadly trap. You see, there were nations once prosperous, rich in natural resources, full of promise, that collapsed, lost control, and surrendered their sovereignty, all due to financial missteps. Today's world is shifting, quietly, yet profoundly. No need for war, no bombs required, just a few lines in a contract, a tempting loan wrapped as a lifesaver, and suddenly, an independent nation turns into a manipulated debtor. And in that global chessboard, China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, is rising as the world's largest creditor, especially to developing or impoverished nations. Which raises a question: do we, the Vietnamese people, and all of us living in this era, truly understand how money flows shape our world? Or are we merely watching the chess pieces fall, unaware that we're part of the board ourselves? This video isn't made for politicians or economists. It's made for you, a worker, a business owner, a father, a mother, someone simply trying to understand the era you're living in, and why borrowing, spending, and repaying isn't just personal finance, it's a life or death lesson. Because if a nation can lose a port over a loan, then an individual can lose a lifetime over a credit card used the wrong way. If a government can accept unfair terms just to chase short-term growth, isn't it true that we often do the same, trading our financial freedom just to satisfy an impulse? Today's story is about the global debt map, and where Vietnam stands in it. But deeper than that, this is a journey to understand how money can shape, even manipulate, the fate of a nation, a community, and an individual. By the end of this video, you won't just know who owes whom, but more importantly, why we must stay awake in every financial decision, big or small. Watch till the end, because maybe, just maybe, this video won't only change the way you see the world, but also how you see yourself. No war required, just money and silence. The Belt and Road Initiative, when loans become instruments of control. Let's talk about a map. Not the kind you hang on your wall, but a map of power. One made not with borders and landmarks, but with roads, ports, and pipelines, funded by loans, and paid for with sovereignty. In 2013, China launched its Belt and Road Initiative, a massive, trillion-dollar plan to expand its global reach by building infrastructure across more than 150 countries. Sounds like development, right? On paper, yes. New ports, railways, highways, power plants, promises of jobs, dreams of modern cities. But behind those blueprints lies a deeper game. Here's how it works. China offers loans to countries desperate for development, places rejected by Western institutions, in need of fast cash. No complicated paperwork, no democracy clauses, just the money, up front. But the fine print? That's where it gets dark. Warning: the debt for control mechanism. Let's break this down. Most of these loans are issued under EPC contracts, where China controls the engineering, procurement, and construction. This means Chinese firms handle the design, Chinese materials are imported, Chinese workers are employed, Chinese banks hold the purse strings. What do local governments get? A new building? A new road? Yes, but they also get debt. Massive, long-term debt. And when they can't repay, which happens often, China takes over strategic assets. This isn't a theory, it's a pattern. Wave ports, pipelines, and power plants, lost in silence. In Sri Lanka, China built Hambantota Port. The project failed to generate enough revenue. By 2017, the Sri Lankan government was forced to lease the port to China for 99 years. In Ecuador, after borrowing billions for a hydroelectric dam, the country had to repay with oil, locking nearly 80% of its oil exports into contracts with Chinese companies. In Zambia, debt ballooned into the billions, and when the country defaulted, China quietly moved in to take control of parts of Zambia's national power company. See the pattern? First, the loan, then, the debt, then, the takeover, And the people? They're never in the room when the contracts are signed. But they're always the ones paying, with higher fuel prices, closed hospitals, unpaid teachers, and a future mortgaged for decisions they never made. Brain, this isn't just about China. It's about the way the world works now. What China's doing may be controversial, but it's not new. What's new is the scale, the speed, and the silence with which it's happening. The United States used to extend power through military bases and wars. Now, China extends power through construction crews and concrete. It doesn't fire bullets. It writes contracts. Light bulbs. So what's the real question here? Not, is China evil? Not, should poor countries take loans? But, what are we really trading when we borrow? And, do we understand the long-term cost of short-term help? In the next section, we'll look at what happens after the contract is signed. The hidden cost, the social breakdown, the political unrest. Because as you'll see, when a nation loses its power to say no, its people lose much more than money. See you in part 2. Sweet promises, bitter payments, when the loans come due. Sweet promises, bitter payments, when the loans come due. Let's face it, when you're drowning, even a lifeboat with holes looks like salvation. That's what makes China's Belt and Road strategy so effective. It doesn't come with lectures. It doesn't ask you to change your politics. It simply says, here's the money, no questions asked. Imagine you're the leader of a developing country. Your infrastructure is decades behind. Your people are demanding change. The economy is gasping for growth. And no one, not the IMF, not the World Bank, is willing to fund you without harsh conditions. Then comes a deal that sounds too good to refuse. No political strings. No painful reforms. Immediate disbursement. Glorious press photos of groundbreaking ceremonies. You say yes. You smile for the cameras. And construction begins. But what happens next is a story we've seen too many times. Downward trend, the economic mirage. The projects look impressive: highways, ports, power plants, railways. But behind the steel and concrete is a cold economic truth. Most of these projects don't generate enough revenue to repay the loans. Why? Because they're often not planned for local needs, but rather for geopolitical strategy. Because the costs are inflated, and the profits flow back to Chinese contractors, not the host country. Because the technology used is outdated, and maintenance costs skyrocket. And worst of all, because there's no local capacity built. Once the Chinese workers leave, what's left behind is often a white elephant, shiny, but useless. Collision, the social fallout. As the debt grows, governments are forced to make impossible choices. Cut public spending, raise taxes, sell national assets, or worse, take on more loans to pay old ones. In Zambia, hospitals ran out of medicine. In Kenya, farmers protested as their land was seized for railway construction. In Pakistan, locals were excluded from jobs promised in Chinese-funded zones. In Laos, a sleek new railway was built, but the country is now buried under billions in debt, with no clear way to pay it back. And people start to ask, who really benefits from this development? Why are we paying for something we didn't ask for? Fire, anger turns political. Debt isn't just a number, it's a social fault line. When the public realizes their country is drowning in debt, and their daily lives aren't improving, protests begin. Trust erodes. Elections shift. Populism rises. And in the shadows, foreign powers tighten their grip. The saddest part? By the time people realize what happened, it's too late. The contracts are signed. The payments are due. And the freedom to say, no, is already gone. Mirror, a mirror for our personal lives. This isn't just about countries. It's about you, me, all of us. How many of us have swiped a credit card to feel better, only to feel trapped later? How many of us signed up for no interest for 6 months, only to pay double in penalties? How many of us have borrowed to impress others, and ended up losing our peace of mind? We all want shortcuts. We all want a way out. But when we borrow blindly, we often trade freedom for comfort. And later, we wonder where our power went. Books. So what's the real cost of a loan? It's not just interest. It's the freedom to choose, the space to say no, the ability to walk away. When those are gone, you haven't just borrowed money. You've borrowed your future. In the next part, we'll take a look at a country that chose a different path. One that said no to fast money. That slowed down on purpose. That watched others fall, and decided to walk carefully instead. We'll explore how Vietnam, despite being a developing nation, is standing its ground on the global debt map. See you in Part 3. Vietnam's Financial Mindset. Growing without selling our soul. Vietnam's financial mindset. Growing without selling our soul. In a world where debt has become a trap disguised as opportunity. One small country stands out, not because it's the richest or the strongest, but because it has chosen a different path. That country is Vietnam. We don't have massive oil fields. We don't have ports that control global shipping lanes. We don't have trillions in reserves to throw around. But we have something far more valuable in times like these. Clarity, discipline, and the courage to say no. Bar graph: Vietnam's debt position, balanced, not blind. As of mid-2023, Vietnam's total external debt is estimated at over $40 billion, not insignificant. But still well within safe limits. What's more important? Vietnam owes only about $1.50 to $2 billion to China. A tiny fraction compared to other developing countries that are deeply entangled in Chinese debt. This isn't luck, it's deliberate strategy. Compass rule number 1. Don't trade resources for loans. In many parts of the world, governments mortgage their future, literally, offering up ports, mineral rights, even land to secure quick cash. Vietnam said no. From the beginning, our leaders made it clear. Sovereignty is not for sale. Not now, not ever. Ports are our trade lifelines. Land is our foundation. Resources are our legacy. We may borrow, but we don't gamble away the country. As the old saying goes, gold can buy a house, but not the land of your ancestors. Globe rule number 2. Diversify the lenders, choose allies carefully. Instead of relying heavily on one source, Vietnam has diversified its borrowing. Loans from Japan, South Korea, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank. These are typically low-interest, long-term loans, with conditions that, while stricter, are transparent and accountable. Yes, the paperwork takes longer. Yes, there are endless rounds of reviews. All of that forces us to think carefully before signing. And that's a good thing. In a world rushing toward instant results, slow decision-making is a form of wisdom. Construction rule number 3. Learn from mistakes, especially our own. If you've ever lived in Hanoi, you've likely heard of the infamous Cat Lin Ha Dong Urban Railway project. Built with Chinese funding and technology under an EPC contract. It took over a decade, ran over budget, and was plagued with delays and public criticism. It became a national lesson in what happens when you hand over too much control to the wrong partner. Since then, Vietnam has tightened its bidding processes, oversight mechanisms, and approval protocols, especially for projects involving foreign contractors. We can't avoid every risk, but we've learned how to spot a bad deal before it's too late. Warning risks remain, and that's why humility matters. Vietnam is doing better than many countries. Yes, but we're not immune to danger. Some provinces still accept Chinese contractors with outdated technology. Some projects still face cost overruns and vague accountability. And we remain heavily dependent on imports from China, leading to a trade imbalance that could become financial leverage in the future. That's why our strength isn't just in policy, it's in mindset. We're not trying to be heroes. We're just trying to stay awake, in a world where so many are sleepwalking into disaster. Light bulb: keeping the debt low is just the surface. The real strength is mental discipline. Vietnam's real achievement isn't just avoiding massive debt. It's building a culture of caution, a system of checks and balances, and most importantly, a generation of leaders who know when to say no. Because borrowing isn't evil. What's dangerous is not knowing who you're borrowing from, what you're borrowing for, or how you'll pay it back. True financial autonomy isn't saying no to every loan. It's knowing exactly why you're saying yes, and having the power to walk away when needed. In the next part, we'll look at the real price countries pay when they fall into the debt trap, and it's not just economic. It's political, it's social, it's emotional, because when a government loses its grip on its finances, it starts to lose the trust of its people. See you in Part 4. Debt and Distrust, when the people pay the ultimate price. Debt and distrust, when the people pay the ultimate price. There's an old saying, The borrower is servant to the lender. Simple, ancient, but never more relevant than now, in an age where a single loan can shake the foundation of a government. By this point in the story, you've seen the numbers: billions in debt, massive infrastructure loans, ambitious dreams. But what do those numbers actually cost? Not on paper, but in real life? They cost trust. They cost peace. They cost the social fabric that holds a country together. Debt doesn't just take money, it takes control. Let's go back to Sri Lanka. When the government couldn't repay its Chinese loan, it handed over the Hambantota port, one of its most strategic assets, to China for a 99-year lease. That was more than just a financial decision. It was a wound to national pride. The people realized, we have a port on our own soil that we no longer control. And that realization spreads. It doesn't show up in budgets or bank reports. It shows up in the hearts of citizens. People begin to ask, why did we borrow this money? Who signed these deals? Why are we, the people, paying for choices we didn't make? And when answers don't come, faith begins to crumble. Firecracker when trust breaks. Politics shakes. Take Zambia, for example. As debt spiraled, the government slashed public services to stay afloat. Hospitals closed. Teachers went unpaid. People took to the streets. In Pakistan, massive infrastructure loans from China brought roads and railways, but locals were excluded from jobs. And resentment brewed. In Laos, a gleaming high-speed railway was built, but many schools and clinics were shut due to lack of funds. Prices soared. Currency weakened. What starts as a debt problem becomes a crisis of legitimacy. People lose confidence. Leaders lose credibility. And in the vacuum, chaos grows. Derelict house, a broken home. A broken nation. Think of a family. A father borrows money to start a business, it fails. Now the family sells their home. The children drop out of school. The parents argue. Resentment builds. The real damage isn't the loan, it's the trust that shatters. The unity that fades. The fear that takes root. Now imagine that, on a national scale, debt doesn't just affect the economy. It hollows out the soul of a country. People stop believing in development. Stop trusting government plans. They begin to live in survival mode. Day to day, wondering what will go wrong next. Stethoscope real-life consequences. When hospitals close and children quit school. This isn't theory. It's real. In Laos, after borrowing billions, rural clinics began closing. Teachers went unpaid for months. The local currency lost value. Imported goods, even basic foods, became unaffordable. Who suffers first? The people who never signed the contracts. The everyday workers. The mothers. The children. Those who never saw a dollar of the borrowed money, but now bear its weight. Brick economic collapse is just the beginning. Social collapse is the real danger. What happens when a society loses access to electricity, healthcare, and education? You can build 100 bridges, 1,000 train stations. But if the people no longer have hope, what are you actually building? Because when suffering goes too far, unrest becomes inevitable. No propaganda, no promises, no distractions will fix it. Once trust is gone, it's gone. This isn't just a government issue, it's a mindset issue. Many people say, debt is the government's problem. But let's pause. A nation is made up of individuals, people like you and me. And the same mindset that drives a country into dangerous debt is the same one that drives us into personal financial ruin. Think about it. Wanting rapid growth, at any cost. Taking loans without thinking about repayment. Trading future freedom for present comfort. Have you ever borrowed to live a lifestyle that wasn't really yours? Ever chosen, buy now, worry later, and paid for it with stress, shame, or sleepless nights? If yes, you already understand what it feels like to be in a national debt trap. Magnifying glass. How do we avoid this trap? Governments must ask this question every day. But so should we. Can you say no to an easy, tempting offer? Can you slow down when the world tells you to speed up? Can you resist the pressure to appear rich and instead build real security? Because that's what freedom is. Not wealth, not luxury, but the power to choose wisely, and the courage to walk away from what looks shiny, but comes with chains. In the final part, we'll take a look at the global debt map again, and see where Vietnam stands. We'll ask the most important question of all. Can we grow without losing control? See you in Part 5. On the Edge of Temptation, Vietnam and the Global Debt Game. On the Edge of Temptation, Vietnam and the Global Debt Game. The world today feels like a roaring financial river. Money flows rapidly to countries, to governments, to cities, with promises of progress and prosperity. Just borrow, they say, and everything will be better. But as we've seen, not all money brings value. Some flows bring opportunity. Others come with invisible chains. In that global current, Vietnam stands at a delicate crossroads. We are not a rich country. We are still developing. We need roads, bridges, electricity, and industry, just like everyone else. But unlike many, we have chosen to walk carefully. Not loudly, not boastfully, but quietly and deliberately. Round pushpin in a sea of debt. Vietnam remains cautious. Let's look at the global debt map again. Sri Lanka gave up its port. Pakistan struggles under crushing repayment deadlines. Laos owes China billions, nearly 40% of its GDP. Zambia defaulted and now faces mass poverty. Ecuador tied its oil production to debt contracts. And then, there's Vietnam. We, too, need capital. We, too, build bridges and factories. But we don't trade away our natural resources. We don't give up strategic assets. And most importantly, we don't lose control. Why? Because we've learned that fast money often leads to slow disaster. Compass the wisdom of knowing when to say no. There's a quiet strength in restraint. Vietnam's path over the past 2 decades reflects a mindset. Expand, but don't explode. Grow, but don't gamble. Accept help, but never surrender control. Yes, we've borrowed, but we've never mortgaged our minerals. We've never handed over our harbors. We've never let short-term needs compromise long-term sovereignty. Bar graph Vietnam's numbers tell a story of caution. By mid-2023, Vietnam's external debt is over $40 billion, a reasonable number for our size. Debt owed to China? Just $1.05 minus $2 billion, a tiny fraction compared to many peers. Instead, Vietnam spreads its risk. We borrow from Japan, South Korea, the World Bank, and the ADB. These partners demand transparency, performance, and clear repayment plans. They are not easy lenders. But that's the point. Their strictness protects us from ourselves. Sometimes, the hard road is the safer one. Warning beneath the surface. Risks still remain. Vietnam isn't perfect. Some provinces still choose outdated Chinese contractors. Some local projects run over budget. And we import heavily from China, creating a trade imbalance that could become a pressure point in the future. But our real defense isn't just low debt. It's awareness. We understand the game. We know the risks. We stay watchful, even when others rush in blind. And maybe, just maybe, that's our greatest asset. Light bulb to walk with both feet on the ground. The truth is, we can't avoid borrowing. No developing nation can. But we can choose how, and from whom. We can set limits. We can say no. We can plan for the long term. Because keeping the economy stable is one thing. But keeping our freedom to choose, that's something far more valuable. Vietnam's approach is not flashy. It doesn't win headlines. But it wins time. And in a debt-driven world, time is leverage. In the final part, we'll zoom out again. Because this isn't just about Vietnam, it's about all of us. Individuals, families, nations, everyone trying to survive in a world that rewards consumption, but punishes debt. What does financial freedom really mean today? And how do we protect it, before it's too late? See you in the final chapter. Financial awareness in a world built on borrowing. Financial awareness in a world built on borrowing. My friend, we live in an era where money is no longer just a medium of exchange. It's power. It's leverage. And sometimes, it's a beautifully wrapped trap. Today, loans are no longer just between banks and borrowers. They're between nations. They're written into the future of cities, of generations, of entire identities. A signed contract today, a pipeline, a port, a highway, can shape the fate of millions tomorrow. What's terrifying is not the lack of money, but the loss of the ability to choose. When we're so seduced by quick fixes and growth at any cost, we stop asking the most important question. What's the price? Globe, a world tilting under the weight of debt. We've seen the collapse. Sri Lanka, Zambia, Laos, Pakistan, Ecuador. Nations once filled with promise, now struggling to breathe under the weight of repayment schedules, foreign control, and lost trust. Even China, the biggest lender, now faces backlash as debts go unpaid and political friction rises. In this new global order, no one is truly safe. Not the borrower, not even the lender. Which begs the question, if everyone's at risk, who really holds the power now? Vietnam's choice, slower, but safer. Amid all this noise, Vietnam chose a quieter path. No ports sold, no resources pledged, no contracts signed in desperation. We chose restraint, we chose balance, we chose to ask the hard questions before taking the easy money. And in doing so, we kept something priceless, our dignity. We may not become a global superpower overnight, but we're building something deeper. A foundation of financial discipline, national pride, and long-term vision. Man raising hand in you. What are you borrowing today? This isn't just about nations. It's about you. Have you ever taken a loan, not because you needed it, but because you wanted to keep up with others? Have you ever bought something to impress, only to end up paying for it with stress, regret, or sleepless nights? Have you ever handed over your future for a moment of comfort in the present? If yes, then you already know what it feels like to mortgage your freedom. Brain true awareness equals true freedom. Being financially aware doesn't mean being afraid to borrow. It means knowing where the money comes from, knowing what it will cost, truly cost, knowing what you're trading in return, and knowing when to say no. Because in a world built on borrowing, the one who stays awake stays free. Candle a final thought. You don't need to be rich to be free. You just need to be conscious. You don't need to be debt-free to be strong. You just need to know what you're saying yes to, and what you're willing to walk away from. Share this episode if it opened your eyes. Because maybe, just maybe, the right awareness at the right moment can save someone's future. No war is needed, no weapons, just silence, and a signature. Stay aware, stay free, and I'll see you in the next episode.